Okay. I will just give you a general picture of the book, not enter into the detail. So I will begin by, oops, yes, by showing a picture of Russell. And this is a picture of his 1919 passport, the one he used when he went to Russia and to China, I think. And this will be the cover of the English version of my book, because the book is roughly on the way, not Russell, but the thought of Russell travel around the world. And I will just show you another picture. This is a picture I initially wanted to be the cover of my book, but for different reasons, couldn't it couldn't happen like that. So in this picture, what interests me is that it shows Russell and Dora in China. And you see, Dora is dressed in Chinese style, but not Russell, who seems to remain an English gentleman wherever he is. It is not him who takes on a Chinese appearance, but his partner. From a feminist perspective, this photo can be read metaphorically. It suggests that the core of Russell's thinking, that is here his body, does not change when he travels abroad, but that his surroundings and secondary characteristic, his partner, can adapt to different local circumstances. Dora dressed as a Chinese woman in China and as a French woman in France, but Russell always remains identical to himself. So this is what seems to tell us this picture. So let me just now quote, or not read with you, but a very important passage, which is very well known. It's the end of the own knowledge of external world. And what Russell says here is that many traditional problems of philosophy can be solved by a new method, which is based on a new logic, is logic, PM logic. Okay? So I just read the last sentence. The one and only condition, I believe, which is necessary in order to secure for philosophy in the near future an achievement surpassing all that hitherto been accomplished by philosophers, is the creation of a school of men with scientific training and philosophical interest, unhampered by the tradition of the past, and not misled by the literary method of those who copy the ancients in all except their merits. Sorry for the French accent. So, I will use many pictures because I like picture. In fact, when I'm thinking, I just draw picture in my mind. So it's better for me to just give you the picture I draw in my mind. Okay? So in my mind, you have on one side a new method, which is Russell's method. And on the other side, a box where you have traditional philosophy, traditional problem, etc., etc. The literary philosophy. And then the idea of Russell is to apply his new logic to the ancient, to the old problem. So usually when people speak about that, they oppose the ancient method based on Aristotelian logic to Russell's new method. And they say, oh, look, with Aristotelian logic, you cannot solve Zeno's problem. But with the Russellian logic, you can. And this is good. And I think it's a good way to approach and to comment and to understand Russell program. But in my book, I do another thing. I don't vary the left side, the Russellian method, but I wanted to vary the, the field to which the method is applied. That is, I wanted to look at what happened when you vary the tradition to which Russell method is applied. So of course, when you want to do that, you, you must, you must not focus on Russell because Russell knows one tradition, which is the British tradition, which is roughly the British idealist tradition. Okay. But he did not inscribe his work on other context because he did not grow up in this context. So my idea was to look for some men belonging to Russell School that responded to Russell on knowledge of external world call. Okay. And I take some, I could not, I select 3 case study, the work of an American, Norbert Wiener, a work of a French, Jean Nicot, and a work of a Chinese philosopher, Feng Yulan. Wiener worked with Russell in 1913. So Wiener, Norbert Wiener, you know him, he's a fantastic mathematician, he's a father of cybernetics, but he began as a student of Royce and Russell. And he made several papers in Russell style. So he has a scientific training and he has philosophical interest. So he could count as one of the men which respond to Russell call. Okay. He applied, in fact, Russellian logic, Russellian method to analyze some problem that he faced as an American student. This is the same for Jean Nicot. Okay, Jean Nicot, you don't know him because unfortunately, he died very early in 1924. But he worked with Russell from 1913 to 1917. So Feng Yulan never met Russell, but he studied philosophy, Western philosophy in Columbia, where he met the American realists, Montague, Perry, etc., who were linked to Russell, in his mind at least. And he read his book. So he speaks a lot about Russell and some Russell epigone, some American Russellian epigone. So Wiener, Nicot, and Feng did not share the same philosophical interest, either with Russell or with each other. The preoccupations of a young philosopher nurtured by the teaching of Freud and the reading of James in the US are not those of a sympathizer of the May 4th movement in 1919, studying philosophy at the newly founded Beijing University. Nor did they resent the interest of a young student who trained at the Sorbonne before the First World War. So the philosophical problem to which these 3 men, applied the logical method varied based on cultural and geographical context. So my question was, is the new method applied in the same way in London, Boston, Paris, and Beijing? Can we say that a single program is being deployed everywhere? Or are there feedback from the philosophical material, which are very different from each other, to the logical method? So, you see, my question was already in this picture. could we really say that in moving around the world, Russell stays the same Russell or not? So I think that concerning this vague question, you could have three, three strategy of response. You could say, yes, Russell stay always the same. That is the, the core of Russellian logic is the same everywhere. It doesn't change with geographical location. And it is applied to traditional philosophy in the same way. Okay. So this schema I will call strong form of universalism. And of course, you could go in the complete opposite way, and you could say, no, 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 no. In fact, you have you when you try to apply logical method to other tradition, this logic should change a bit. Okay, so this will be a strategy which we could call logical pluralism. So you will have in order to apply Russell logic to neo-Confucianism, for instance, you have to change a bit Russell logic. So this will be the opposite pole of the strong form of universalism. And you could as well have in between, you could have a weak form of universalism, which means that, no, Russell logic doesn't change with the location. Okay, PM logic is the same everywhere. But the application of this logic is not the same everywhere. There are some feedback from the philosophical material to the method, not to the logic, but to the way logic is applied. The application of logic to the different kind of philosophy is not mechanical. There are some back and forth adjustment. So you will see that my strategy in the book is this third one. I think that the second one is completely false. Okay, for all the Russellians, there is only one logic. But the idea is that you have some room of adjustment of logic to the philosophical material. So, okay. So in fact, I kill the suspense because my answer will be the middle one. So one thing is sure, Wiener, Nico, and Fang were all universalists. Okay. They all opposed to C.I. Lewis, for instance, pluralization of logic, and referred to PM logic as the only logic there is. So you could erase this possibility, this option as an option, which is open for Russellian, at least in the 20s and 30s. So now this is, okay, this is a general, in French you say problématique, that is the general issue that I want to rise in my book. Now I will enter into Wiener, Nico, and Fang works a bit. I should say at the beginning that in fact you have to group Wiener and Nico in one side and to reserve one other side to Fang, because what you find in Wiener and Nico is a genuine application of logic to philosophical problems. Wiener and Nico are good logicians. Fang is not a logician. Okay, so what you find in Fang is a mutual interpretation of early analytic philosophy and Russell philosophy and Chinese philosophy. That is, sorry. What you find in Fang, but I will explain that more fully, is that Fang used analytic philosophy in order to understand Chinese philosophy. But he used as well Chinese philosophy in order to understand analytic philosophy. So you have a back and forth movement between analytic philosophy and logical method on one side and an understanding or a description of Chinese philosophy on the other side. But I will explain that. But I think the cases are quite different. I did not know that at the beginning. It's just in working on Fang and on Wiener and Nico that I realized that they were very, very different. So Wiener, just to say a few words on Wiener and Nico and then on Fang. So for me, Wiener is a disciple of James. Okay. So what you find is in William James is a description of consciousness as a selecting agency. So I read, we see that the mind is at every stage a theater of simultaneous possibilities. Consciousness consists in the comparison of us with each other, the selection of some, and the suppression of the rest by the reinforcing and inhibiting agency of attention. The highest and most elaborated mental products are filtered from the data chosen by the faculty next beneath, out of the mass offered by the faculty below that, which mass in turn was sifted from a still larger amount of yet simpler material, and so on. So a picture, because I think only with picture. So the idea, I think, that is behind Wiener's mind is that experience is a stack, is a pile of different layers, okay? And the more you go down, the more it is chaotic, okay? And the more you go up, the more it is regular. And you pass from one level to the other, to the more regular one, by attentional filter. Okay? So, I think that in Wiener, what Wiener say about that is that this attentional filtering could be grasped by logic. That is, the idea of Wiener was to construct the more regular layer of experience from the raw material, from the level next beneath, by using logical construction. That is, by using Russell's method. Okay. So, come back. So, the role of logical construction for Wiener was to describe this process of filtering chaotic data from which orderly experience emerges. So logical constructions serve to regularize experience in Wiener, not to reinterpret statements, as in Russell. For Russell, logical construction is part of a reinterpretation strategy. That is, you start from a certain discourse, for a certain kind of discourse of theory, for instance, discourse about external body, and you say, in fact, this discourse is not about bodies. It's about sense data. Okay? But body can be identified as a set of sense data with such and such properties. So for Russell, logical construction is a strategy of reinterpretation of a certain kind of discourse. For Wiener, it's not like that. For Wiener, logical construction, à la Russell, is just a way to regularize experience and to regularize discourses. Okay? So, we now apply logic. In fact, in order to read Wiener text, you have to master Principia Mathematica because Wiener is used all the time the Principia, the PM notation. But on some very important points, Wiener is opposed to Russell. For instance, Wiener rejected Russell's atomistic approach to sensible experience. Okay? The raw data for him are the sensory continuum, from which, by comparison, you can construct sense data. That is, Russellian sense data, like in Carnap, are construction from more raw material. Second thing, Wiener refused to base scientific knowledge on a direct and absolutely certain cognitive relation. There is no acquaintance in Wiener. Okay? There is no acquaintance. What Wiener maintains is that all knowledge is uncertain, is relative, even mathematical knowledge. Third, Wiener presented the method of logical construction, he called it synthetic logic, as an alternative to axiomatic method, analytic logic. And he didn't want to use axiomatic method at all. Of course, you find something like that in Russell, but Russell used and continue to use axiomatic method. For example, in order to define order, you have some postulate. Okay. So I just summarize in a picture. So you see the 3 points down below the box is a means to say that there is no foundational level in Wiener. Okay, and each box can be described axiomatically, but Wiener didn't want to have any axiom. He began by an axiomatic. Okay, he began by describing a box, if you want. But afterward, the other box are just constructed by what you call logical operator. So in Wiener, the logical construction is, in fact, a propositional function that he applied to a variable. Okay, so he has a kind of logical operator that code the processes of logical construction, which you don't have in Russell. Last thing on Wiener, in some of his writings, the later philosophical writing of Wiener, the one you find in 1920s, Wiener combined the construction technique, the logical construction technique inherited from Russell, with what he called statistical tabulation, that is, the method used in probability and statistics to extract information. So, for instance, he said that an average, a statistical average, is a logical construction. So this is very important, this point, because it draws a bridge, draw a link between Wiener work on logical construction and Wiener late work in mathematics, where he used a lot of statistical technique in exactly the same way that he used logical construction in his early paper. For example, you have in electronic, you have what is called a Wiener filter. And a Wiener filter is a means to regularize a signal. Okay, And so you see, this is exactly the function that were the logical construction in his early paper to regularize experience, for instance. So just sorry for that, because it's a bit chaotic, but okay. I finished with Wiener. I just want to say a word on Nico. So in Nico, the important guy, it's not James, is Bergson. So here I use a description of Bergson from Russell, but as usual, I will hide my picture. Sorry if you're fed up with my picture, but I think I want to go quick. So what Nico explained about Bergson is that in Bergson, you have two separate notions. You have the geometrical change, that is the change that is described by science, the movement, the trajectory of a body in space. But you have as well the sensible change, that is the perception you have of the change, okay, of a body in the space. And what Bergson say is that the geometrical change, what is described by science, by intelligence, has nothing to do with the perception of change. Okay? The two are ontologically different. Okay? Geometrical change is a change in what he called a multiplicity of juxtaposition. And the sensible change is a change in a multiplicity of interpenetration. So multiplicity of interpenetration is a kind of a complex. You have many parts, but the parts are not distinguishable from each other. They interpenetrate. They are fusioned. And what Bergson says is that intelligence or science wants always to apply their concept to sensible change. And they just transform sensible change in a kind of geometrical change. And this is a betrayal of experience for Bergson. Okay? To apply geometrical concepts to the sensible world is a projection of an alien scheme onto a heterogeneous reality. This is what he called a vicious projection of intelligence or a vicious intellectualization of sensible experience. So you don't have to do that. It's forbidden for Bergson. It's a bad thing to do. It's a vicious thing. So I think that the problem for Nico was not to articulate the different layers of experience, as it was a problem for Wiener. The problem for Nico was to give a status to this forbidden projection. Okay, Nico was very attracted by this idea that you can apply to a reality a kind of framework that does not fit with the division natural to this kind of reality. He was very attracted by this idea. And he wanted to give it a logical status. Okay? And so this is what he does in his PhD, La géométrie dans le monde sensible. Okay? So he says, okay, Bergson is right. Sensible change and sensible world can be described without resorting to any geometrical concept. Okay. He is okay. There is multiplicity of juxtaposition on one side and multiplicity of interpenetration on the other. So he's very un-Russellian in this. But he showed by using logical construction that you could give a status to a geometrical description of the sensible change. Okay, so I cannot enter into this work precisely, but the idea is that it's a use of Russellian logical construction, but in a very un-Russellian way. Okay, because it is used to answer a problem that is Bergsonian, in fact. So the important thing in Nico is that, I told you that for Russell, logical construction is part of a strategy of reinterpretation. That is, you have a discourse which is fixed and you vary the interpretation. Here, what is very different in Nico is that you have an interpretation that is fixed. You have a domain, a world, an experience that is fixed. Okay, the sensible world. And what you want to do is to vary the description of this fixed point. So what you have to vary is not model, it's description. This is what I, I explain here. And in his work, I claim that Nico anticipates, in fact, a very important notion developed in model theory year after, the notion of an interpretation of a theory into another theory. Okay, this is a transfer of framework, okay, of a theoretical framework from one domain to another one. So, on Wiener and Nico, two conclusions. From a historical point of view, there are lasting advances in logic in the work of Wiener and Nico. But those advances were tightly connected to the philosophical problem they each faced. For Wiener, the James problem, that is how to articulate different levels of reality. If you don't want to be too psychologist, okay, if you don't want to rely on an unexplained attention, and how to give a status to this vicious projection in logic for Nico. So what this means for me is that there are feedback from philosophy, not on logic. Okay, Russell and Wiener use PM logic. They don't change the basic logical law, but on application of logic. Okay, that is the way they use the Russellian concept are very new, and you have some advance that are considered today as an advance in logic. Okay, so one word with Fang, but I'm sorry I have been too long, so I will go very quick. No, I will pass Fang, in fact. Too bad. I could come back to Fang if you want.
Deb, if you're worried
Yes,
about time, 5 or 10, another 5 or 10 minutes, totally fine.
yes,
If you
but I will try to insist on the conclusion, perhaps better.
Okay, sure, as you
But
wish.
you could ask me about Fang if you want.
Okay.
So in conclusion, I would try to insist on what I see as two results of this book. Does studying this reception, that is Wiener and Nico reception or Fang reception of Russell, teach us anything about Russell work? I think so. This teaches that we must distinguish in Russell between issues relating to logic and issue relating to the application of logic. And the other word of application of logic is logical analysis. I think that logic and logical analysis are two very different things. And I think that Wittgenstein, for instance, is, has understood this very clearly. Russell logical analysis, not logic, but Russell and logical analysis takes many forms and adapts to the specific characteristic of the subject it addresses. Of course, logical analysis depends on logic, just as the application of rules depend on rules. But there are no rules for applying the rules. And there is no logic that drives the logical analysis process. That is, to do a good logical analysis is a knowing how. It's not a knowing that. Okay, you have a fantastic text of Kant on applying the rules in the pure reason critique de la raison pure. Okay, where Kant say that you can learn rules in school, but you cannot learn how to apply the rule you have learned. Okay, only experience can do that. Only this is a kind of knowing how. And what seems to me important to appreciate Russell philosophy is to make room for this knowing how, this art, this non-mechanical way of applying logic. Okay. So this, in fact, book is kind of a second part of my first book on the relationship between logic and mathematics, so Russellian non-logicism. Because in my first book, I said that, which was about Russell's logical analysis of mathematics, I claim that Russell deduced mathematics from logical laws. Of course, Russell is a logicist. But what I wanted to pinpoint was that Russell does not deduce how to deduce mathematics from logic. So the sentence is a bit complicated, but I'm sure I think it's intelligible. Russell does not analyze, for instance, arithmetic in the same way that he analyzes geometry. He adjusts himself to the material he has to analyze. In logical analysis, you face with a starting point which is not logical. You relate with something, with a material which is external to logic, and you try to capture it. So, for instance, I could use exactly the same schema, okay, and instead of putting, I don't know, American tradition, James philosophy, and Bergson philosophy, I could put arithmetic and geometry, and this is exactly the same kind of phenomenon. Okay, so this was my point here in the book, and I think it's important when you read Russell to distinguish logic and logical analysis. Perhaps for you it's obvious, but for me it has been an achievement. So sorry for that, but I confused when I was a student. I confused the two things, and it seems to me that it blocked the possibility of thought. But the real goal of my work was not to better understand Russell. The real goal of my work was historiographical. I think that the history of analytic philosophy is strongly presentist. So I think that in England you say Whiggish, but it's Whig history. The aim is often to explain how we got to where we are today. Wiener Nico Fang had no descendants because Wiener did mathematics and no longer philosophy. Nico died, and Fang had to give up his first philosophy because of the Mao Revolution. So Wiener Nico Fang had no descendants and should be forgotten if we adhere to this kind of history. It's a dustbin of history. It's not very interesting because it has no connection with our present. And the impetus to write this book came from studying the intellectual history of the 18th century. In France, references to the Enlightenment are very political at present, and numerous works have been published on the topic. So I was a bit interested. I learned that reading this book, I learned that over the past 30 years or so, historical research has completely overturned our image of the Enlightenment as a homogeneous and French, I have to say, movement, particularly by studying its multiple receptions and reconfiguration around the world. Analytic philosophy is sometimes compared to a kind of neo-enlightenment. And in this book, I try to apply to it the methodology that was applied to the Enlightenment in the hope of achieving the same kind of result, namely an enrichment of our historiographical toolbox. In particular, sorry for the English, in particular, what I wanted to do was to question the use and the perimeter of the concept of analytic philosophy. Was Wiener an analytic philosopher or a pragmatist? Was Nico Russellian or a Bergsonian? Was Fang a Western or a Chinese philosopher? I will tend to say both. And this shows that we need to re-examine the relevance of the concepts of analytic philosophy, just as 18th century historians re-examine the category of the Enlightenment. More specifically, I wanted to challenge in my book the idea that analytic philosophy is essentially an Anglo-American product. Very early on, French, Chinese, and other forms of analytic philosophy began to appear. I put analytic philosophy in a quotation mark because I don't know exactly what it means. So this is not new, in fact. Everyone knows that analytic philosophy is not only an Anglo-American product. But generally, we know that because people, historians of analytic philosophy, have looked at the source of analytic philosophy and have said that, a very important source is Australian tradition. Another important source is a Czech tradition with Bolzano. Another very important source is British idealism, in fact. Another very important source is Lotze. Another one is Bolzano, etc., etc. So generally, when you say, no, analytic philosophy is not only an Anglo-American product, you pluralize the sources, you pluralize the origin of analytic philosophy. But I think there are two problems with that. First, I don't like the origin. I don't like to put too much emphasis on origin. I think it's misleading in a lot of ways. And the second thing is that this is another form of presentism in my mind. But maybe I'm wrong. I have had many discussions on this with a colleague. But when you try to say that analytic philosophy as a Austrian source, for instance, then it seems to me that you vindicate that our present is not only Anglo-American, but Austrian as well, etc., etc. But what I think we should question is the presentism, and to focus on the plurality of receptions seems to me a better way to challenge presentism. So that's all. And merci de votre attention. Okay, I will stop the sharing. Okay.
Thank you so much, Seb. First off,